Hey, my friends, welcome back into the Leaning into Leadership podcast. This is episode 220, and my guest on the show today is Joe LaTorre. But before we dive into our conversation with Joe, I want to take a moment to talk about something really energizing from a recent keynote that I gave. I had the chance to speak to a group of school leaders, and not only was the audience incredibly engaged, but even the sound team came up afterward and said, "Man, I usually just sit back, I monitor the levels and that kind of thing, but I was hooked the whole time." Man, that was powerful. If you can hook the sound team who has heard it all, you know you've absolutely crushed it. Now, that's the kind of impact that I strive to bring to every single event, to be authentic, to be actionable, and to be uplifting. So if you're planning a leadership retreat, a back-to-school kickoff, or a professional learning day, and want to start your year with clarity and with energy, let's connect. I'd love to bring that same energy to your district, to your event. Now, let's get on to today's episode. Joe LaTorre is a middle school English teacher, team coordinator, and the founder of the Bridges program, a student leadership and cultural exchange initiative that has truly transformed how students engage with school, how they engage with each other, and how they engage with their community. Joe's work is very intentional around culture, trust, and student empowerment, and it aligns perfectly with what we talk about so often here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. So let's not waste any time. Let's dive right into this conversation with Joe LaTorre. All right, everybody, welcome back into the show. Today, my guest, Joe LaTorre, is an educator in New York. Always love when I have the opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with a practicing educator and one who honestly I think speaks a lot of the same language that I do, with being intentional, with focusing on culture, with really engaging our students and finding ways to give them authentic learning experiences. We're going to talk about all of those things today on the show. Before we get to that, though, let me welcome our guest in. So, Joe, thanks for joining me here on Leaning into Leadership.
Darrin, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor. I'm the biggest fan of your podcast. I think I'm listening to over 100 episodes now, and I don't know where I will come in the order, but I'm excited to listen to 100 more. So thank you for having me, and really excited to talk.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate that. I really do. Let's do this. Let's maybe zoom out just a little bit and orient the viewing and listening audience a little bit on who Joe LaTorre is. Give them a little bit of your story. Tell them a little bit about who you are and kind of what really is your passion in education.
Well, I am a reformed finance bro from Long Island, New York, and I did that for a few years out of school before realizing, where my heart really lies, and it is in education, and it's specifically in English education. So I'm really fortunate. I've been teaching almost 15 years now at Oceanside Middle School, and that's on the South Shore of Nassau County in Long Island. I have a bunch of roles in my building because I really do love being here. So in addition to teaching, I'm a team coordinator. So our middle school is a 7th and 8th grade middle school, and we practice teaming and looping. And I think a lot of people know what teaming is. It's a team of teachers of different subject areas. Looping, I don't know if it's as commonly known, is when you get the students for more than 1 year. So you get to really build relationships and culture in a different way. Along the way, I became a union representative. I'm in year 9 or 10 of that. I'm starting to lose track. I founded a program called Bridges, which is, sort of my passion project that developed into something bigger than I could have ever imagined. And we're about to hit year 10 there, and I'm going to talk to you more about that later. And I'm really fortunate. I've won two New York State English Teaching Awards. The first for the program Bridges in 2019, and the last this past year, 2024, for excellence in English education. So here we are, and I would have to say the thing that I'm most passionate talking about, besides poems and literature and all the great things that make an English classroom really rewarding for kids, is culture building and creating buy-in so that kids really embrace those experiences in our classrooms, especially in middle school, where they might not always see the connection between a poem and their life. They're not quite at that age where they have the life experience to kind of make that text to life connection yet, but we always find ways.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and let's maybe stay on that. Let's stay on the middle school piece. I don't know if you're aware of this. My first 5 years in education, I was a middle school teacher. I taught middle school science. Absolutely loved it. Before moving on to the high school to teach and to be a head coach and that kind of stuff. Truly enjoyed middle school. And of course, culture in the classroom is something that's very important to me. I know you're aware, my most recent book that I co-authored with Katie Kinder is Culture First Classrooms. And in many cases, Katie, of course, was a middle school teacher. We tend to think a lot about the middle school classrooms and in many ways because I think middle school is the one that gets overlooked the most. We think a lot about, oh, here's what happens in elementary and then we think about high school and the preparing for college and career and all of those types of things. But I want to go back to something that you said there specifically, and let's stay with middle school. It's very applicable at all grade levels, but let's talk about that actual building of culture in your classroom. And I think this is going to lead us eventually to talking about bridges, but share a little bit of what you do, maybe your approach to that culture building, especially, when you're looping, which I think is so interesting. My daughter had the opportunity to loop in third and fourth grade. Second and third grade, she looped. So wonderful, built great relationships with her teacher, but also with all of her classmates, which I thought was really great. Maybe talk about it from the, when you're getting a new group versus that, start of year 2 with setting the standard and building that culture in your classroom.
So I love looping. And it's funny, I think to your point about middle school being overlooked, I think sometimes people almost block out their middle school experience. When you tell people you teach middle school, they have like a visceral reaction, like,
oh yeah, you can see it. Yeah.
Yeah, in like an adult's face. And I get it because it's the first time you care about how you look, and it's probably the worst you're ever going to look. And it's the first time you care about how you speak to people and you want to talk to people and make connections, and you kind of are lost on how to do that, whether it's with the adults who teach you or the kids who are usually pretty new. You're moving from that elementary pond to like a much bigger, lake, so to speak. And so what we like to do is show them on day one that we trust them. And that's the thing with the teachers I work with on my team is we try to take an unorthodox approach to it. I think that you are used to sort of being dripped trust through school, right? Because you're growing, and it's only natural for all the amazing elementary teachers kids have to kind of, trial and error, give them a little bit more trust. But one of the things we do is we show them right away that we're going to start with trust and go from there. And I think that's the foundation of all of it, because when they see that you trust them, they trust you. And I think in terms of building culture, we start with a few different things. Obviously, we try not to do the standard icebreakers, but we try to find different ways to come about it in an unorthodox way. One thing I'll do sometimes is they'll come into the room in the first week and I'll have a roll of toilet paper and I'll say, take as much or as little as you like. And they're just looking at me like I'm crazy for asking them to take toilet paper. And then I go, all right, guys, you have how many squares? That's what you got to tell everybody. Now let's do that. And for a lot of them, it's not going around in a circle and saying your favorite ice cream flavor. It's being put on the spot and seeing that it's going to be okay. That idea of you're speaking in front of a room of people who have just met you, and it's fine. We're all in the same boat together. We're all going to go through this together. And once you start building that trust right from day one, you could talk about how trust works as a team. And I think whether you're a team of adults, so the teacher is working with the kids, or the kids working with each other, you show them how you're accountable to one another. And you build that accountability through silly things like, the team dress up days that, every middle school and even elementary schools have. But you also build those things through showing them, listen, like we are all on task together and we're creating something bigger. And then over time, you get to build community. So you start with this trust and you start with this accountability, and you find ways to build community. And sometimes that's something very, very proactive. So, you've done restorative circles. I'm sure we've heard that terminology before. Sometimes it's a proactive, meant for the moment day where we spend the entire day working on it. Sometimes it's, you know what, guys? let's put everything aside first and put you ahead of the curriculum. And I think for them, that's unorthodox. And I think for a lot of teachers, it's sometimes a hard sell at first, but once you try it, you get it. Because I think we're all rushing to stay on pace, especially if you teach English and reading and math. You know, you're held accountable to state tests and state
Right.
standards. And you view it as every day I'm not teaching toward those standards is a day I'm losing toward, making the progress. When I think in reality, when you center that culture, you get something better. They're going to follow you anywhere. And that's kind of been, our secret is before we touch curriculum, we really try to build relationships. And I actually, because you brought up your book, I have to say, because I've just finished it and it's wonderful, and I think it should be, the standard of, when we're doing, pedagogical instruction, is that it's based on this idea of relationships. That's what it is. We're a relationship business. You know what I mean? Where we're creating lifelong relationships, honestly, because I'm old now and now I work with some of my former students, but
Yeah.
we're creating relationships for the long haul. And I think you have to start there. I'm really happy to see that, people like you are writing books like this, because I think it's making some of those dinosaur expressions like "don't smile before Thanksgiving" and go by the wayside, and people are starting to open up to this idea. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate that. Thank you for that. There's unsolicited plug, but thank you. I think one of the important things there, with what you're saying, I mean, we are 100% in a relationship business, and if we're not investing in our relationships, that's when actually I think things are going in the opposite direction. So I would echo what you're saying. Setting a day aside or setting time aside to focus on relationships is not time that you're losing to cover curriculum. Because if all you're doing is covering curriculum, students aren't necessarily learning it anyway. And, once they know who you are, when they know that you trust them and that they can trust you, that the odds of, the curriculum that you are bringing to them sticking and actually becoming something they take some ownership of, I think the odds of that go up astronomically, especially in middle school. This is the thing that I think is maybe most special about middle school. The students at the middle school level are, you talked about it. They're worried about how they look. They're trying to speak to people, all of those kinds of things. But they're also still teacher pleasers. And when you really lean in and build relationships with kids, to me, that was the most important piece when I was a middle school teacher, is just focus on the relationship. Man, I had kids who worked so hard in my classroom, and other teachers who would say, "I don't know how you're getting work out of that kid. He does nothing for me." Well, if you're building the relationship with them and building some trust, you get to know their story, and you understand how you can best support that particular child. So I want to take that just a step further, because I think once you get to that place where you've established those trusting relationships and you're developing this atmosphere of you will be trusted, that to me is where that student leadership piece starts to come out. And I know that's so much of what that Bridges program was all about, was really enabling students to lead. And I mean, that's something I'm really passionate about. And I'm really excited to hear you talk about this Bridges project that you've been working on now for almost a decade.
Yeah. And actually, you're catching me on a fantastic day, because my collaborators on the project and I, we're about to embark. We're just finalizing a date to plan and dream up next year. So Bridges is the passion project, and I have to thank, all of my collaborators on the project. So hi guys, hope you're listening. But I'll break it down for everyone. So I live on Long Island, and Long Island is diverse. It's a suburb of Manhattan, but it's also largely segregated in a sort of de facto way, where people often live in communities where everyone looks like them. And those communities can be next to each other or close by, and yet you don't interact with people who are not like you. And I was very fortunate to start my teaching career with two great mentor teachers, Nina Sabbath and Justin Williams, at Uniondale High School, which is a district that's demographically different than Oceanside. And I loved it there. I really, really learned so much there from the students, from the teachers I worked with. And then I came over to Oceanside and I started working here, and it's a different group of people. And I started to realize these are two communities that are 15 minutes away that never interact. And we dreamed up this program that way. So it starts in the 7th grade. Students apply to be the program. We ask them to talk about an issue that they think that the government, so nationally, state level, needs to address, so a societal issue, and then an issue which they think they're empowered or could address in their community. So they write these assignments for us. We go through them. It's sort of like your audition for the program, and we create cohorts of 30 kids from each school that then meet throughout the year. And it starts in 7th grade and moves all the way up to our senior year. So these kids now form friendships and bonds with people they never would have met starting in the 7th grade. And along the way, we create that sort of decentralized leadership that, we both love, where the kids are sort of taking the onus on themselves to create something special. So in the 7th grade, it's just about, why don't you make some new friends from a new community that you don't know? And the kids really take to each other, and we give them cultural experiences. In the 8th grade, we start to move more into discussing some of the issues that, for better or for worse, teachers are often afraid to bring into their classrooms now. And, these are, issues related to race, politics, religion, the hot button issues. We show the students how to share space when they disagree. We show them how to find and verify the accuracy of those sources, so that media literacy skill set that's going to matter. And then a crazy thing happens. Those kids get older and they go into the 9th and the 10th grade. And we start, exposing them to guest speakers and new cultures. Last month, we took them to a Sikh temple, and they learned about the Sikh faith. And that's a religion that students in neither school really would know much about. And so now, two demographically different districts are learning about a third group they never would have met in a million years before this program. And we start to give them leadership skills. So communication tools that they can use to be the class president, the captain of the football team, at their part-time jobs, to resolve conflict. I don't know if you've heard of Amanda Ripley and the looping technique. We teach them that. And it culminates in them being seniors in their school communities and seniors in our program, where we have what's called a year of giving, where the kids partner up or work in even larger groups and create these service learning projects where they do give back to their communities. And it's just been so rewarding. Our first group are in college now. We have 2 kids who are college roommates that wouldn't have met without the program. And it's something, man, I can't say enough good things about the teachers or the kids, because they're all going somewhere. Some are in the military, some are in college. All of them are giving back. One of our students just did, it was Mental Health Awareness Day. I believe that's nationwide. I don't know if it's a New York State thing, but we just had Mental Health Awareness Week in New York, and we just had a Mental Health Awareness Day, and she put on in the local community center a Cards for Mental Health Day. And, when you start to see the way kids take, sort of the seeds of the culture we're trying to create, and then already give back to their communities as teenagers, it's just incredible.
I think it's an amazing program, and what I love about it, there's a whole lot of things there that I really love about that. But one, that you've been able to build that sustainability to where you have kids who are in college who started in that program when they were in the 7th grade, and I think that's really cool. That 2 of them are college roommates that met through that program. I think that's a really really neat thing. Another thing that I really like about that is that service learning element, that it isn't just about learning the curriculum in the classroom. It's also about what we're doing outside of the walls of our classroom. We're, not only, maybe, taking down some of these barriers that exist between our communities, but that we're actually doing things that impact our collective community. Is there a project or 2 that you can think of that are just really awesome examples of what the kids have done over the years?
So we're working on different things. Some kids, they're into the concept of like doing voter registrations. That's something we would be focusing on. A lot of them, believe it or not, and this is, I think, a sign of the times, a lot of kids do have this vested interest in mental health. We call it a reinvented career day for the program in October, where we kind of changed the model and made it more about having kids sit in small groups and rotate through small groups, rather than, booths where they go, okay, what do you do for a living? we had the kids work in smaller groups and kind of dialogue with different professionals about what they do without us watching. So again, there's that trust piece. You really ask the questions that you want to ask when there aren't adults watching over you to make sure you don't embarrass them. And we kind of just let them run with it. But the thing that's sticking out is the way they've worked on. I know I just touched on one of those projects. Their focus has been on mental health, both in their community and in the community at large. And how do you translate that? Something that I think is cool is through some of the conferences and experiences we've given them, they've thought about, things that are starting to become, I think, more common in the US, but the concept of having student board leaders to work within their community, which, we now have in Oceanside and Uniondale. They've gotten into the concept of messaging and how, creating podcasts, bringing awareness to different topics. That in itself is a form of, creating change at an age where I think you don't really feel empowered, do you? Right? Like maybe if you're lucky, you're able to drive and are fortunate enough to have a car as you move into the later stages. But I think kids starting from middle school into, that end of high school, it's time where you really want to be an adult, right? And you really want adult responsibility and you really want adult trust. And what you learn through these programs is also adult accountability. Oh, wow, I said I'm going to do this. Now I have to follow through. Oh, well, I'm doing a service learning project with other students. They're depending on me to do this. I can't just not show up for them. And I think that's my favorite thing about the program because, I don't know if every single student is going to go through Bridges or come through our team as middle school students and necessarily, go on to that career they said they were doing in the 7th grade, but they are going to learn to be accountable to others. They are going to learn to give back, even though what's coming back to them for giving isn't necessarily apparent in the moment. They're going to learn to just value community. And that's probably the coolest thing about this. So
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome.
incredible. Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
the thing now, especially, and I'm sure, you've probably dealt with this a lot, are people bringing up the program Adolescence and how it addresses mental health, the Netflix series.
Yeah.
A lot of kids have mental health, as their focus in terms of service learning, in terms of I'm doing a Google Genius Hour project with my students right now. A few of them are addressing it through their projects. So that's fascinating to me that they're already, forward thinking and also, service oriented.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of what it does as well, and I'm sure you see this, and this leads into my next question, is that it creates a lot of buy-in into the school, into the classroom, into the community, not just from the student, but from those in the greater community that are seeing the impact that these students are having on the community, the impact that you and the rest of your team are having on these young people, which I think is just amazing. Let's talk a little bit about buy-in. And you and I were talking about something before we hit the record button, about a project that you had kind of taken on with Lockheed Martin. They're kind of in your greater area, but then also just creating buy-in in general in the classroom. I think this is something that, all teachers, would say, man, I will take anything that will help me get students to take even more interest and more ownership in their learning. Share some thoughts and some ideas around the stuff that you do that are helping to build that.
So I think you're constantly looking at 3 things. We've talked about trust already, right? And how by giving that trust, you're going to get something back from kids. But then it also becomes, how do you create resilient kids who are going to take the risks they need to achieve, whether it's through service learning projects or being comfortable speaking about the hot button topics of Bridges in front of students who they do not know that well. Remember, at that stage, we're just getting to know students in another building in another community, even forget about another building. How do you take the intellectual risks of an English classroom? Because our subject, it's not black and white. It's not, here is the hard answer. A lot of the answers in an English classroom, you're really kind of opening up and making yourself vulnerable. So I think you have to be vulnerable to them. You have to share your victories and you have to share your own flaws and show them that sharing that does not make you a weak person, that it actually makes you a stronger person. And then they start to buy in and take those risks and build that resilience that I think every parent wants a kid to have. but it's also about creating targeted opportunities for a community. So we do, a cultural food festival that is like the highlight of my year when we do this, where you're sharing a little bit about who you are at home. And I'm fortunate, I've traveled quite a bit. There isn't a time we've done this where I haven't tried something new. And so now that's me, an adult who's traveled. Think about how you're exposing kids to new worlds who maybe haven't left the town that they grew up in. So those community events, we show up for them, I think probably is the best thing. So when we talk about small actionable items that like a teacher can do, go to their sporting events, go to the play. Because yes, at some point you do have to teach curriculum, and I'm very much an advocate for balancing the curriculum with culture-based days where you're creating that buy-in. But also there's little things you can do, like showing up to their football game. Showing after this, actually, I'm headed to the baseball and softball games. So doing those things, we don't realize how much it matters. I think for a lot of us, we just assume the kids don't care. You're just another face in the crowd. But going to the school play, going to the board meeting when they receive an award, nominating them for all the different awards and opportunities that exist. Certainly, as you move through middle and high school, there are state and local awards. I'm really fortunate. I just had a student win a local writing award, and getting her honored at the board meeting is like tremendous for her as a seventh grader. Doing those things are a different way to show up for them. And again, like I'm incredibly lucky to have worked with great mentor teachers who told me that from day one. Whether they see you as a mirror or as like a window to another world because you're not from this community, showing up to the baseball game, showing up to the school play, it's very hard not to buy into the person who is taking that extra time with you to create that. And that's kind of the thing that I tell all of our newer teachers. We just had spring concerts. Sometimes parents don't show up to those concerts and you're the only one there for them. And when they see you sitting there, they are thrilled, man. Like, I cannot overemphasize that. And now we've become a little troop of teachers that make sure that we're there, because I think there are a lot of spaces where teachers don't think to attend, but the school and the community are setting it up right there for you to, build that buy-in you need to then come into school the next day and, give Darrin a shout out for killing it at the tuba last night, because I don't know how often Darrin's hearing that. Or with the Lockheed Martin program that you mentioned, they're creating opportunities for kids to find their tribe. A lot of kids now are into robotics and CAD and coding and all of these cool, let's call them frontier technologies, but they might feel like they're the only one. And when you help put them onto programs like that, whether they exist in your school or through a regional company doing, outreach, you're helping them find their tribe. You're helping them build that belonging. And then they give it back to you when they come into your classroom the next day. Also, I would say one more thing, apologies.
No, go for it.
Think outside your subject. I'm an English teacher, and I think natively that means caring about, let's say, the school play or the creative writing magazine. But you know what? We also like lacrosse, and we also can go to the art show and maybe take a picture of students' art. Hey, man, I saw this yesterday. You did a sick job. I didn't even know you could do that. I think showing that you care about them as a person, not just as someone writing an essay in your class, really, really does matter. So it's that sort of outside the box thinking that builds that belonging.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is the more that you do this, the more that you share with your students that you're paying attention to them as more than just, a grade in your grade book. The more that you're investing in them as a human being, the ultimate thing, and we started this conversation with this, is you're building a relationship with them. And, you mentioned that, you have coworkers that are, former students, and, even, an old guy like myself, who's been around education for 30 years. Just in the last couple of weeks, I've had 2 different conversations with former students of mine. for a variety of different reasons. And, you'll always continue to have those relationships if you're willing to invest in those relationships with the kids. I mean, that's really truly what it's all about. Man, so much good stuff, Joe. And like always, our time has just flown by. So, we're at that point where I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody here on the show. So it's the Leaning into Leadership podcast. So, Joe, how are you leaning into leadership right now?
Let me just say how excited I am to answer this question because I love your podcast once again. So I'm leaning into leadership by bridging the gap between intention and intentionality. And for anyone who's like, these are buzzwords, what is he talking about? Let me break that down in a far more simplistic way. I think that every single person that works in a school building has the intention to create kids who feel like they belong and are going to be successful adults. Every single person, from the principal to the security staff to our paras, which to me are paraprofessionals, are the unsung heroes of schools, and
Amen.
especially these days, to the educators who are running their classrooms. We have these incredible intentions, and maybe we start the year, as we said, with a grounded piece of culture building. But culture is gained in drops that you have to, place in the bucket over and over, day after day after day, right? And that requires intentionality. It requires, in the same way we plan units of study, in the same way that we, do backwards learning models to make sure that, kids are going to be able to understand a concept or even be able to learn a skill. You have to take that same approach with building buy-in and creating belonging and creating a incredible classroom culture. And when I speak to the concept of intentionality, that's what it is. Looking at the next month, 2 months, 3 months, school year, and saying to yourself, I'm going to make sure that when things get crazy, when I get overwhelmed, when I'm facing finals, as many of us are right now as we record this in late May, I'm going to take a moment and show them that they matter as much as the final, that I care about them as a person. And when you're intentional, not just having good intentions, and you're saying, you know what, the baseball games after this meeting with Darrin, I'm going to make sure that I'm there. I think you're going to get so much more out of every kid. And my goal is to communicate that to the world at large through my speaking, through training, through following up with the adults I work with, the way you followed up with 2 of your former students, and now I get to follow up with students. And yeah, I think that that's probably how I'm going to be leaning into leadership over the next year, and I'm excited to do it.
I think that's an excellent answer, man. I love that so much. So, Joe, people are going to want to follow you. They're going to want to get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to connect with Joe LaTorre?
So I am at josephlatorre.net. That's Joseph, Josephlatorre.net. But I know that, in our profession, there are a variety of social media. It seems like Instagram is the one that a lot of people are on right now for our space. And I'm the Joe LaTorre, so TheJoeLatorre on Instagram. I'm also on all the other spaces. And I'm always willing to talk shop with anyone, new teachers, administrators, people thinking about getting into the profession, because I love what I do and I want you to love it the way I love it.
Outstanding stuff. Oh, man, I really appreciate this. This is a great conversation. Thanks so much, Joe LaTorre, for joining me here on Leaning into Leadership.
Thank you very much, Darrin.
All right, friends. Excellent conversation there. Really appreciate Joe reaching out and coming on the show. Just so much fun having a conversation with him and definitely learning all of the amazing things that he's working on. And now it's time for a pep talk. Folks, I want to start today's pep talk with a quote that I come back to quite often. You can't lead what you can't see, and you can't grow what you don't nurture. Look, leadership isn't accidental. The best leaders I know are not the busiest. They're the ones that are the most intentional. Being a school leader means juggling hundreds of things every single day, but if we're not intentional with our time, with our actions and our words, we're just managing chaos. We're not leading people. Let's start by talking about time. How many times have you said, I meant to get into classrooms today, but then your day got hijacked? Hey, I've been there. A long to-do list doesn't equal meaningful leadership. If we want to impact culture and instruction, we have to schedule time for it, just like we schedule time for meetings. What gets calendared, get done. Being intentional with time means choosing to focus on what matters most, not what screams the loudest. Now let's think about actions. Every hallway walk, every decision, every email, every single one of those sends a message. Our actions have to be aligned with our values. If we say relationships matter, but we never stop to talk with a teacher or a student, what are we really saying? Intentional leadership means acting with purpose, modeling the culture and behaviors we want to see in our teams and in our classroom. And then finally, our words. Look, words carry incredible weight, especially from someone in a leadership role. A quick thank you and I see you can change someone's day. But careless words, man, they can damage trust so fast. Speak to inspire, speak to connect. Be the voice that lifts others and reminds them of why behind the what. Look, intentional leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being purposeful. Be purposeful with our time, our actions, and our words. Because when we lead with intention, we're not just managing, we are truly transforming those around us. And that's what I've got for you, folks. Thank you so much for joining me this week on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. Get out there, have a road to awesome week.